we've got Ray here. Ray is a gentleman that I met indirectly when we started to set up the Guardians 300. Ray, it's a pleasure to have you on here. I'm not going to bump my gums for too much longer because, you know, some of the stories we've already shared have really sort of whet my appetite. My main concern is the way policing's going. But Ray, let's give things a little bit of context. Tell us a bit of your story. Tell us where you're at and what gives you the right to even comment on this situation.
Look, it's a great pleasure to meet you, and I feel a kindred soul here. No, I'd really like to back up to how I came into being, in actual fact. And I had a father that well, first of all, I had a father that saw the 20s slump. He was about 8 years old when the 20s slump came, and he said, never again am I going to see the compromised nature of life that I had to live through and watch my parents go through, because they lost everything in the 20s and the 30s. That was his background, if you like, and he was a worker. He grew up partly on a farm, and he then got into the war. Well, he was an engineer before the war, and he was putting batteries in an Austin 7 before anybody ever thought of battery power for vehicles. He was one of those sort of odd entrepreneurs, if you like, always out there doing something different. So I grew up in that atmosphere, but he walked up the Normandy beaches. He was part of the push through the continent with the RAF. He was a ground support, and he eventually became a squadron leader. But they liberated Belsen, and he said, look, at the end of the war, he really felt that that Europe was not the place to stay. And his brother had gone out to South Africa, so he found himself out there designing the electrification of the South African railways. And that's where I was born, because he took mum out there. And I was born in Cape Town, which I think was really, really good, because I had the taste of another continent, and I think it gives you a broadness. And I've got cousins out there, so it's always been sort of somewhere that I'm sort of fairly interested in. But they didn't like apartheid, and you know, I had a black nanny, and I loved her dearly. And she lived in, and that was not something that was ever done with the white people. You didn't have them living with you, and it was all wrong. So we came back here. But when Dad came back here, he said, I want my own piece of ground. He said, I'm not going to have the inability to actually fend and look after myself. So we bought a small acreage, 20 acres on the South Downs here in East Sussex, and lived off grid in a caravan, because there was no accommodation on the farm, and he sought to get accommodation, and we built up a farm here which eventually became nearly 100 acres, but and has about 7 dwellings on it. So I've been through that sort of whole, if you like, from living off grid to eco living, to having our own stock, growing our own food. You know, we've kept it, if you're talking of the ground, and done it. But as I grew up into my teens, I couldn't really work out what I wanted to do, but I like to help people. And Father sent me to college after school to learn engineering, to follow in his footsteps. And I saw a bunch of people having a great riotous time at school. They were on day release, and they were the police cadets. And I thought, yay, I could do that. And they look as if they're having a good time. And I like to help people. I thought, naively, I thought I could go into the police and actually help people. And in actual fact, in '66, when I joined, that's exactly what the force was about. A provincial force was about helping people and being of service to people. And if anybody hearing this remembers Dixon and Dock Green, that was the type of policing that I joined. And honestly, I joined a small provincial town, and we used to have almost 100% clear up. The people were our best friends. They loved us. We loved them, and we served them. But boy, did I watch in the next 20 years that service ethos change, and even the name changed. Yeah. We were a constabulary. I was a constable. I swore my oath, and the oath that I took was to protect life and property, to keep the peace, and to prevent and detect crime. Boy, do I not see that anywhere today. Well, I became a young Bobby in Brighton, which I did very well at training school. And at training school, we had 3 days of solid common law. And we learned common law underpinned all of the laws of this country. And we learned the history of common law. And you know, now the cops do not get any form of training in common law, and that should tell us something.
Yeah.
So I did well at training school, and I got put into the busiest subdivision of the county. And by that time, the amalgamations of the centralization of policing had started, because we went from a beautiful little provincial police force called East Sussex to the amalgamation of all of the boroughs and the 2 counties into one Sussex force. But it still retained that ethos, but it was called force. And that was the change. It was a change that I wasn't to really appreciate then. But boy, looking back now with the knowledge that I have now, you actually could see that what Ike calls that totalitarian slow tiptoe into the place that the controllers wanted to take us, with more centralization, less local accountability, because we have police authorities in the towns or in the provinces that actually appointed the chief officers. That all changed. And we were locally accountable, and the numbers of police in the area just massively changed. When I first started in Brighton, the unit beat policing system was in being. I think that came from somewhere in the north, and it was the most amazing system, because the number of bobbies on the beat, the number of bobbies driving powder cars, the area man, the area car, meant that you had such a level of policing that, again, the public got a service. But do you know what they said? It was too expensive. It wasn't. It was too expensive. It was too damned efficient, and they weren't getting enough people into the penal system, and they were getting all the crimes cleared up. So that got thrown out. It was the most successful system that there was, and there's absolutely no reason why we couldn't have kept that system. They used the crazy idea of not having enough money. And when you know where money comes from, you know, the money tree of the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, then you realize that that is just an absolute con. But, you know, I saw lots of things. I had a very interesting service. I did a number of different things within my service, but some of the most interesting was when I got onto the regional crime squad. I became the Southeastern Area Intelligence Officer, and then went on to actually run as a detective sergeant my own criminal intelligence, and then a counter-terrorist unit at Gatwick Airport. Saw a lot that was not being dealt with, and saw a lot that didn't need dealing with, that we wasted time on. So I started to question things.
Yeah.
Dreadful.
And have you been present at any of the protests at all, Ray?
I have. And
what have you seen at these protests?
Well,
right?
Let me lead up to that, because
okay.
I gave you a bit of chronology here that really gets it in. What I saw in the very early 80s, I saw something called PACE come in, the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. That gave a watering down to some aspects of policing, but it gave us sort of like a more liberal approach to policing that none of us within the force, certainly those with a bit of service, could really understand. And it also brought in the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, which started to really take over the prosecution, because I used to prosecute. As a sergeant, I would take our cases, my men's cases, to court. And we happily did that. But then we got these solicitors who are actually pretty lame and pretty hopeless taking on the cases. But what I also saw at the same time, because I was a section sergeant at Crawley, which was a training station, I saw a thug element coming into the police force. And this was in the 80s. So I spoke to someone who was doing the testing, and they were psychometrically testing a certain percentage of recruits for psychopathic tendencies. And, you know, when I heard that, I thought, what? And you could tell it of these guys. They had no empathy. They could not get on well with the public. They would rub the public up the wrong way, and they were the wrong people to have in the police. Yeah. I remember saying to my section inspector, why have we got these people in the force? I don't want them as a probationer on my watch, because I know that they're going to be a problem. But they were being brought in, of course, to be the eventual leaders of these thuggish squads now that I see policing Well, to start off with, they were policing these like the miners' strike, which I refused to go on because I thought that was just completely wrong. And then going on to the things like the fracking businesses and the stuff that's come. Well, I left in the early 80s because I actually could not stand the ethos, and I locked horns so many times with the seniors, asking them what was going on, why we were having watered down policing, and why we were focusing on things that we hitherto hadn't. And you could see that what was happening, and I couldn't put my finger on it then, but you could actually see the corporatization of a force.
Yeah.
There really just to support the corporate world and had no interest in providing a service to the people. And it just got worse and worse. And that's really what we've got now. We can see we have corporate whores who act as thugs, lifting without any form of jurisdiction, because we have the judges' rules that have not been repealed, and they can't be repealed because they've come from case law and from practice. We have judges' rules that are not even complied with because there are 4 specific reasons why people can be arrested, and they're just lifting people. But yeah, that's sort of, so that's a little bit of a background.
And that's great, Ray, because what are the, give us an insight into the 4 reasons why people can be arrested. What are they going to be doing?
Gosh, I've really got to get my head around this. But basically, they've got to be suspected with reasonable cause of having committed an arrestable offence.
Yeah.
An arrestable offence is a serious offence.
Yeah.
It's either they're in the commission of, they're reasonably suspected of, or to prevent the commission of, or to prevent them hurting someone else. The most woolly aspect would be to prevent the commission of a breach of the peace.
Yeah.
Well, to be preventing the commission of a breach of the peace, someone's got to be showing some violence.
Yeah.
But if they're just passively standing there, and you can easily ascertain their name and address, you've got no power for arrest. Even if you can't ascertain, if they're not doing anything and they're just standing there, there's no power of arrest. It's rubbish. And that's the reason we've got 250 cases gone through the CPS to court that have not been convicted. There's not been a conviction for this.
And of course, a lot of people don't know that. The mainstream media doesn't show that. So the mainstream media are also complicit in exacerbating this fear that stops people from going to exercise their inalienable rights, essentially.
Right. Yeah, of course, their inalienable right to actually travel, to freely protest, and to to walk about.
Absolutely. Yeah.
No. I see it as a total travesty what's going on. And of course, when you start to look into the deeper things that we know that there are many doctors speaking out about, we've got just a corporate takeover, which has some pretty nefarious sort of aspects.
I couldn't believe it. I mean, I'm a personal safety public order trainer. I was Home Office trained, and of course I was at Trafalgar on a couple of occasions, and what I saw was escalation, not de-escalation. I didn't see them apply anything like the conflict management model. There was no threat. And what I couldn't get my head around was why the police made charges, why they had horses there, why they had war dogs there, why they were making in column, that why they were running attacks in column.
Well, to me, it's an incitement, and I saw it at the fracking protests at Balcombe. I saw it again in Manchester. I went up there, and I also saw it with, I'm just trying to think of what it was called now, with the sit-ins in London quite a few years ago.
Right. Yeah.
And I got held in a kettle, but I managed to talk my way out of it. But I just saw a level of what I call unadulterated thuggery.
Yeah.
And basically those were the men. Look, I ran the heavy mob back in the early 70s in Brighton. I would not have men that did not know how to, one, handle themselves, and certainly not lay hands on people in a thuggish way. But I've seen fists being used, and I've seen people grapple with. I've seen
kicked, kneed,
elderly woman pulled about. It's like, that's a grossness. That's not what policing's about. And those people ought to be hanging their heads in utter shame for being aggressive. But you know, we know that some people carry an aggression, and it was those people, they were bloody or psychometrically testing. And of course, when you've got that type within the force doing the recruiting, you know, it's easy for them to get those types in because that's what they're comfortable around.
Well, and I know that even in the Met Police, they could recruit people with violent criminal backgrounds as well. So they were happy to recruit those people. You could argue, you know, in a world where the police are being aggressed, that might be a useful system. But the problem with it is the best predictor for future behaviour is past behaviour. So if you're aggressive and violent, there's a good chance you might do that in the future. And where do you draw the line, right? You know, because as you know, when the pressure's on and you're in moments like these that are heated, anything can happen if you're not disciplined and you're not emotionally intelligent.
That is why with the heavy mob in Brighton, I would only have people that really could hold that line and not step over it, and certainly never use violence. You know, we used open hands, and we would stand there and we'd take plenty of flack, and then we might have to move in. But if we moved in a very determined way, if you like, but not using any form of fists. If you had to arrest someone and they were being violent, you contain that violence rather than going out and literally using violence.
And this is what I've observed, because what I've seen them, I've literally seen them draw buttons and hit red areas. And for people that are unaware, for you to strike somebody in the head, they've actually got to be doing something that constitutes that kind of, or that warrants that kind of behaviour or strike. You know, the head is a red zone. I've seen them hitting amber zones and green zones, but what I couldn't work out was why they were doing that. There was no, from my perspective, I couldn't see any reason why they were even engaging on that level, following the conflict management model. But no, and it's very difficult when you understand. But I think the thing is, Ray, you know, we're going to be instrumental in educating the public, because, you know, if you were to say to the public, what kind of tips would you give them if they were coming up against violent police?
Well, certainly always to remain passive, but stand in your power. And not really argue, but just state the point that you need to make. And there are quite a few phrases one can use. But you know, but certainly not use any form of violence, and not use violence verbally. You know, I love the NBC model. I think it's it's come out of, you know, some very well tried and tested sort of space. But
and of course, violence breeds violence, and of course these are also people that have to make a living, have to feed the families, just like anyone else in our communities. And I certainly always have dialogue with them wherever I go, because with a lot of the protests and the rallies that I've been to, I find that I choose the most senior people to grab hold of just to see what they know. And because when you talk to some of the young constables and you ask them if they're standing under their oath as constable, they look at you as if you're strange or from another planet. I could never get my head around when you ask them to tell you their oath as well. A lot of them can't articulate that.
Well, that is very sad. You know, it is for someone like me, it's a sadness to see such a deterioration, and to see a really complete dysfunctionality now. You know, there's a guy, and I can't remember his name. He's a reporter that has been harassed. You know, to actually see harassment now of police and taking down doors and things like that, when it's not necessary. It's just it beggars belief in my mind. But there we go.
And of course, police feel stress as well, Ray. You know, and ultimately, it's only a matter of time before these guys, I believe, become worn out.
Yeah. Well, you know, I've been involved with something called heart math. and HeartMath have done a lot of training in frontline services, and there's some very, very good ways of actually diminishing that stress, and some easy things to be taught. And one of the things that when I was becoming a HeartMath coach, I wanted to do was to actually take it into the police, but life took me in different directions, and maybe that's something that could be offered because it's very powerful, it's very simple. To actually,
well, we're going to show you something as simple and even and probably doubly powerful as we connect, because certainly one of the systems I created from having spent 30 years in the military was an emotional coaching tool that we will no doubt share, in the future. I mean, the thing is, if you were to leave us with your last thoughts, Ray, from someone that trained and has been in the police a long time, what advice would you give these young constables, the people in the police now? What advice would you give them as a constable?
Well, I would say step back a bit, take some breaths, look at what they're doing, and know that violence, any form of violence, doesn't achieve anything, and in the long run all it actually does is antagonizes, and it puts people's backs up. And if they I don't think I think it's they have, if they lose the respect and support of the public, then they actually are finished as an organization. They basically, to me, are paramilitary, and we've got probably more passive people in the military than we have on some of the front lines in the police. And please, I'm not saying all. I know some great cops.
Yeah, absolutely. Here.
I hear with some great cops who actually are so vexed and so concerned with what's going on. And I know there are plenty of YouTube pieces now of them quietly talking, but of course, they're revved up by certain aspects. So mine will be, look, just step back, find ways of de-escalating, find ways of helping their colleagues who maybe are revved up because of certain situations, and look at ways of calming the situation down, and actually really questioning what are they doing, and who do they represent, because their oath of office is to the people. It's not to these faceless bureaucrats and disgusting lying politicians. And that's not all of them, but boy, we have some that are absolute abject liars.
I spent a lot of time in the military, Ray, and for me to become a captain in the Army Physical Training Corps, the number of programs and training programs I had to do just to earn my stripes was unbelievable. I often wonder, when I look at the likes of Boris and his team, how much personal development they've ever done, or how many times have they actually been tested in terms of their character. Because for me, they don't have any.
I can tell you of someone who knew Boris when he was a junior reporter, and he was just as much of a buffoon as we see nowadays, a junior reporter in Brussels, when he used to go to a well-known pub there and prop up the bar, and some of the stuff he used to come out with. Well, it would be interesting for people to actually hear, and it doesn't look as if the moral character has really changed a great deal. And I think most of us realise that most of these senior politicians are just stooges of a much deeper and darker game.
And as my old Sergeant Major said to me, Ray, he said, never be one of those types of leaders that people only ever follow out of curiosity because they know something's going to happen. So, Ray, I think that's been marvellous, and that's our opener, really, because we're going to get you involved in some of the other things that we're doing with Guardians 300, and I look forward to that. But I'd like to say thank you for sharing your experience and knowledge with us, because this is a nice way of the average person recognising that something's wrong, but they don't quite know what. So thank you so much, and I have no doubt we'll be doing some more.
Well, great pleasure, and it's great to meet you, and great to be around like-minded people.
Absolutely. Thank you.